Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We are excited you're with us this week. Last week we talked about, it was our 100th episode last week that we've ever done here on the Personality Hacker Show. And we talked a lot about our mission, where we're headed, and the community that we'd like to build. And we've got a lot of positive feedback around the intention around personal growth, understanding personality typology, models of human development, all the models and frameworks that we teach and work with. These are tool sets, and we use them to grow as people, and we'd like to build a community of like minds with you that are looking to grow as people. And one of the things that's emerged from this is we've had a lot of conversations over the past few weeks as we want to get this message out. How do you communicate what you believe and how you want the world to be, the way you see the world? That may not be what other people around you see the world like. How do you communicate this effectively? How do you get the message out? And what does that look like? Are there frameworks and models for communicating in and of itself that we can talk about and utilize and become better articulators, better communicators in general?
Yeah, because, so one thing that I get a lot, or we get a lot written into us, this question of, I'm an intuitive, and how do I explain that to friends and family members that are sensors who don't care? They don't care that I'm intuitive. They might not buy the system. There's a lot of, sometimes there's negative press about the Myers-Briggs system, or there's negative press about typologies because they just put people in boxes and it's not a hard science. And how do I express what is very meaningful to me to people who don't really seem to care? One of the reasons why this came up as well is because we've actually been having a lot of conversations with people lately where the other person is very certain of the rightness of their position. And I'm never certain of the rightness of my position. Like, never. I hold everything kind of loosely, and I'm pretty open to being wrong on just about everything. One thing, though, I've noticed is that when a person is certain of their position and I press them and I say, well, persuade me, let me know, or give me reasons why this is true. And if the person can't back it up, if they haven't maybe thought it through as much as my questioning demands of them to have thought it through, at the end of it, they'll go, well, I just know it. I just know it to be true. And I'll say, well, that's not very persuasive to me. Like, I can't really borrow your conviction and make it mine. I can't really trust that it's making sense to you, so therefore it should make sense to me. I'm going to need something more. And then there's the sense of frustration, or the sense of like, well, you'll find out, right? Like, you'll find out. So because they weren't able to persuade me of their position, then there's something wrong with me. And I'm sympathetic to that way of thinking, because that's the way of thinking I was raised with. In the religion that I was raised with, there was this sense that we had the ultimate truth. There was no question about our rightness and the truthfulness of our position. And our commission was to go tell everybody what that was. And then if they had the right heart condition, they would know we were speaking truth and it would resonate with them. They would know that. And if they resisted what we were saying, then that meant that they had the wrong heart condition. So it was this overarching narrative of, I'm right, and if you can't understand that, then you must have bad intent. There must be something wrong with you. And I don't think that that's just the position that the religion that I grew up in, I don't think that that's just, specific to them.
No way.
I don't think it's specific to religion.
Political ideologies, I think there's all sorts of places this shows up.
Totally. There's this idea of like, I'm right, and if you don't agree with me, you're wrong, and there's something suspicious about you because you can't agree with me. And that includes if I'm pressed to explain it to you and I don't have all my ducks in a row and I don't have my T's crossed and my I's dotted, that shouldn't mean anything because I still know I'm right and you should still be agreeing with me. And that position is so pervasive, I think, in our culture. That position of, if you don't agree, then there's something wrong with you. We were talking about how that's actually opposite of how reality seems to work. Because again, that person is requesting of you, actually in some cases demanding of you, to borrow their conviction from them. It's not your conviction, it's not making sense to you, it's not resonating with you. But despite that, you should still believe them. So you should be borrowing their conviction from them and then now acting in accordance with that conviction that isn't authentically yours to begin with. It was theirs. So even if a person could do that, and of course we see cases of that with like children and their parents, but what we've noticed is that when children borrow their parents' convictions, a lot of times that's not sustainable. And it's only because they got those kids young, right? Like the kid hands all that power over to the parents, and that's why they believe whatever is the ideology of the parents. When we're talking to other adults, that's not so easy, and it's even less sustainable. So the truth of the matter, or truth, I say that with quotation marks around it, what it seems to be the reality of the situation is if we have a conviction, if we think something is important and we want to convey an idea, the onus is on us to be persuasive. And if we're not persuading the other person, it's not for us to then question their intent or question, say, their heart condition. It's on us to ask ourselves, how could we have done a better job of persuading the other person what my position is, or what my belief is, or what my conviction is? Like, how do I articulate that in a way that lands with them and persuades them to see things as I see them, and maybe that impacts or affects their behavior? Now, that's not to say that this is all about, trying to brainwash other people or trying to get them to agree with you being right. This is more around the topic of, okay, so we want to spark an intuitive awakening. That's how we've chosen to call it, intuitive awakening. We want to spark this movement of people who are acknowledging that there's a certain way that they've been wired that might make them different from other people. And that self-acceptance might encourage them to take the next step, which is now, how do I use my talents to help improve things? That's our desire. How do we make a movement happen? How do we encourage people to see the world in a similar way that we do in order to then encourage behavior change and then maybe encourage global change and go towards what we would say is a more desirable model for human interaction? How do we do that? Do we just show up and say, oh yeah, there's totally these people called sensors and these people called intuitives, and if you don't see that, if you don't agree with us, well, there must be something wrong with you? Or is the onus on us to be persuasive? Is the onus on us to, is to encourage other people to see our position in a way that isn't so judgmental if they don't? And that's really what this podcast is about. It's about first accepting that responsibility is on me to articulate my position, my belief, my concept, my conviction well. And then we want to talk about a strategy for doing that. What is a way, or what is a model that we can use in order to craft our message so that it does stick with the other person?
I like this conversation at the framework level too, because it's not about the result we're trying to get. It's not about the actual thing you're trying to communicate. Now that's what you'll end up doing, but really this skill set can be applied to all sorts of communications you want to give out to people, whether it's persuading them to an ideology, a way of seeing, a way of, doing a basic task at your business or your job, whatever it is. The onus is on you to be a good communicator, communicate well to someone so they understand what you're saying. If they don't understand, that's your problem, not theirs. And I think that's a perspective shift for a lot of people. And you listening, that might be a perspective shift for you. You might already think that. How I got this perspective shift, a business mentor of mine made a statement. He said, this is talking about customers and your business. He said, you are responsible for the success of your customer in the products and services they purchase from you. In other words, if they purchase a product and service and they don't have success, that's your fault, not their fault. Now, there's some limitations to this. I think that obviously that's an ideal situation, right? I mean, I can't help that someone purchases one of our programs from Personality Hacker, never looks at it, never implements it at all, and blames us. There is some limitation to that, but the principle is good, because what we do then is we try to make it very easy for them to consume that information. We make it very easy for them to go through that program, because I have that mindset. We have that mindset that it's our responsibility, if someone gets a program from us, that we will ensure as much to our ability that they are going to be successful in that. The onus is on us to make sure everything about it, the way it's designed, the way it's consumed, the way the information is presented, and even the ideas in that information is palatable and able to be digested in a way that they can actually make sense of it and implement it in their lives. So it's very important for us in that way. And I think that perspective shift on all levels really helps you as a person become an excellent communicator.
So about 5 years ago, I read a book called Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. They had a model in Made to Stick that was essentially a step-by-step guide to making sure that your message is sticky. Now, they studied a bunch of urban legends, they studied marketing messages that were some of the most powerful, and they broke down the key components, like the same patterns that repeat over and over and over again in these urban legends and in these really powerful marketing messages. They found 6 components that were in all of them. And the book is essentially have these 6 components in any message that you're trying to get across to other people, and it will be sticky. It will be a sticky meme. And they also asserted that you don't have to have all 6, but the more that you have, the more likely your message is to be sticky. So what we wanted to do in this podcast, since of course we're trying to make our message sticky as well, is we wanted to go through these 6 components and give little examples of them and talk about ways that we can make sure that our message, and then you as the listener, whatever message that you're trying to get across, are indeed sticky messages.
So they took an acronym and they broke it into the word success, and the first word that comes off that is an S word, obviously, and it's simple, keeping your message simple. And one of the distinctions here is not a dumbed down message, not something that's simplistic in its it could be a sophisticated message, but it's priority. It's basically giving out the core of the message. What is the core, simple nugget that you're trying to get across? The most basic nugget. If the person forgot everything else you said, what's the one thing they can take away from your message? Here at Personality Hacker, we have a very simple thing. We talk about growing your co-pilot, and you'll hear us in most things we talk about. The simple message is, if you get one thing from what we talk about here, and you're looking at your personality type, it's personal growth lives in growing your co-pilot in your personality. That's what we just harp on over and over again, because we believe that simple message will catch on.
Yeah, now that is a simplification. And you could even argue maybe a gross oversimplification, because our personality type is so complex, because as individuals, we have a lot more things that are influencing us than just our Myers-Briggs type or our cognitive function stack. We have a lot of different things going on inside of us as people. However, if you do that one thing, you're going to have more success than a lot of other strategies. So even though it's not the only thing we teach, not even close, it is the one thing we've tried to get across, and we've tried to make it simple. Grow your co-pilot. One of the ways that they illustrated this in the book Made to Stick is they talked about Southwest Airlines tagline. They called themselves the low fare airline. That's what it is. Yeah. I'm like, it's sticky, but I can't remember it. No, it was that Southwest Airlines is the low airfare airline. And they illustrated this by saying that this is not just the message that they give to their clients and customers. This is the message that they give to all the people within their corporation as well. And when they're trying to make decisions about what to do, because they also want to be fun, they want to be spontaneous, Southwest has this core value around giving their people a lot of freedom to be, quirky and fun and make it a really great place to work. So the question of what they're going to do or what they're allowed to do when they're being fun and quirky all comes down to that messaging as well. We are the low airfare airline. So they illustrated it with, is it okay while you're doing the emergency messaging at the beginning of every flight? Is it okay if you make that fun and quirky? Well, the question is that going to cost Southwest in any way? No, it's not going to cost anything. It's going to be fun and quirky, but it's not going to cost anything. Okay, yes, that's okay. You can greenlight that. When you get off the plane, is it okay to throw confetti in the air as if you're celebrating the fact that everybody just landed someplace? Well, no, that's not okay, because confetti means that somebody's going to have to come clean that up. That means man hours. That means labor. That means cost of labor. So that's not going to keep our airfare down, so that one's not acceptable. So it's not just a tagline for marketing, it's actually a core value of theirs to everybody inside the corporation. So it's very sticky. We're low airfare. That means that anything you do, if it's going to cost us money, it's out. And if it's fun, quirky, but won't cost us money, it's in, it's greenlit. And that's one of the things that they've done in order to make that message global to the entire ecosystem.
The next letter for success is U, and it stands for unexpected, getting attention by breaking the frame of someone that is listening. So people, often when we're communicating with people, we almost talk in autoresponders. Often we'll say something. I mean, you have this happen a million times a day in your life. Hey, how are you? I'm good. How are you? And we don't even think about what we're saying with each other. We just say this because this is how we socially interact throughout our day. But if you break someone's frame, and if you're ever around me in real life, you'll see me do this often when I'm communicating with someone. They'll say, hi, how are you? I'll say, good morning. I'm doing great, no matter what time of day it is. And often people will look at me and go, good morning, especially if it's in the afternoon or evening, and be like, wait, it's not morning. And it's a way to break state. It's a way to change the perspective of the person you're communicating with. So are there ways as you're communicating that you can be unexpected? You can communicate in a way that breaks someone's frame or shifts something on them?
There's an interesting phenomenon that happens in not downtown Las Vegas. This is more like the Strip. So downtown Las Vegas is different than the Strip in Las Vegas. And along the Strip, there are people who try to hand out advertisements for strip clubs and also for brothels and other places that some might believe are savory and wouldn't want to accept. They're like the size of little cards, like playing cards, and they'll pass out these advertisements. One of the things that they do, and it's very confusing to new tourists, is they slap the card on their hand really loudly as you pass by before handing it to you. And the reason why they do that is it's a strategy to break your state. If you're startled or if something has broken you out of your, like Joel was mentioning, the autoresponder of your life, then we're designed to open frame in those moments because we're trying to gather as much information as possible to know whether or not this is a threat. So when we break state, we also simultaneously open frame. So the reason why they slap the advertisements against their hand is an attempt to break you out of your frame, to break state, and then you'll receive their advertisements. So this is one of the things that comes along with the word U of unexpected, right? The letter U and the word success is referencing, as Joel just mentioned, unexpected. Unexpected means breaking state. It means that we are designed when somebody breaks our frame or breaks our state to now go into an open frame and accept whatever the person is saying. So once we do that, once we open our frame, now we're no longer resistant. Now we're no longer primed to argue if we hear something that goes against maybe a deeply held belief. We're now in a state to be able to receive, and in fact, because we are designed to want to gather as much information in that open frame, we're actually wanting the information now. So one of the best ways to make your message sticky is to design it so that it's breaking frame for the other person. It's packaged in an unexpected way. It's meant to be enticing, not to build a resistance.
So the next letter in the word success is C, and it stands for, in this model, concrete, your communication being concrete. If you are an intuitive, this is something that, bringing things down from an intuitive abstract level into a sensory or concrete level, very specific, and be as tangible as possible in your communication. This can be a challenge, especially if it's a high-minded idea or something like intuition. How do you contextualize that in a concrete way? How do you make it approachable for people? It's very tangible. How do you make it approachable for people that deal in tangibilities, in real life scenarios? So that's the next step, is making it concrete, as concrete as you possibly can make it.
Yeah, in the book, they literally use the phrase, use sensory language. Use language that appeals to our senses, it's tactile, it's visual, it's auditory. They talked about Aesop's fables. And so when they were in Aesop's fables, all of the fables have an overarching principle that they're trying to get across, but they tell it in the way that you can put yourself inside the story and you can be experiencing the fable while you're there.
We have some examples of this in just daily interaction. I'm burning the candle at both ends, or I'm at the end of my rope. We have some tangible expressions of these abstract concepts of, I'm so stressed out, I don't know what to do. I'm at the end of my rope. It's a concrete sensory way of talking about something that's more abstract in nature.
And this is a really important one for us to remember. In fact, in particular for me to remember, because I have a tendency as somebody who leads with an intuitive process. I lead with what's technically called extroverted intuition as an ENTP in the Myers-Briggs system. Extroverted intuition is very much about pattern recognition. It's pretty abstract. And sometimes it's hard for me to remember to be concrete. One of the things that happened early on in my teaching is that I would teach a principle and a person would say, well, can you give me an example of this? And I'd be like, oh, I don't have any ready-made examples. And then I would sort of fumble until I could think of something. And that's because I don't think in those terms as much. And as people who are, wanting to encourage the world to understand this intuitive awakening, one of the things that we're going to have to do as intuitives is remind ourselves to be as concrete as possible. We have on our YouTube channel, we have a video that I made called The Ladder of Abstraction, or How Sensors and Intuitives Can Communicate with Each Other. And the ladder of abstraction is something that I think we've talked about in previous podcasts that I took from a book called Language and Thought in Action by a writer whose last name is Hayakawa. And the ladder of abstraction is effectively a way to understand the different levels of concreteness versus abstraction, and understanding that there's actually multiple layers to this. It's not just you're either being concrete or you're being abstract. There's multiple layers to it. And it's a model that I recommend going and checking out if you're confused about how to make things more sensory. The model helps understand how you can continue to get more concrete. What are some of the markers of something being truly concrete versus something being really abstract? So I recommend going and checking that out, or even just checking out the book, Language and Thought in Action, because it's a fantastic book. I highly recommend everybody read it. So getting more concrete is a challenge for somebody like me, and yet it is a massive and very important component to making something sticky.
When I'm communicating, I always am looking to see, can I have an example, a story? Narratives are great, stories are great. Metaphor can be great if you're trying to communicate an idea that's maybe more abstract, to bring it down to a concrete level. So some of these ideas, I think, if you want to be an excellent communicator, I think that idea of concrete, this is one I think you could really focus on a lot, to really get it down to the place where people can take it and go, okay, I get what you're saying here. I think this is one to really tag in your mind, this idea of making things concrete.
Yeah, the book itself is so great at doing this because they talk about making something sticky. Sticky is such a wonderfully sensory word. We have so many associations, so many tangible associations with the concept of something being sticky. And on the outside of the book, they have like masking tape all throughout the book to indicate stickiness, right? And they've brought the concept of ideas, which is very abstract, to a very sensory, concrete place of having it literally stick to your brain. So I think the writers have done a fantastic job of making their concept sticky, and by using the illustration or the metaphor really of tape, of masking tape. And so what can we do with our concepts and ideas? How can we bring them down? That core message, remember the first letter, S, was about making it simple. So if you have a core message and you keep hammering that core message over and over and over again, can you make that core message also very concrete? Can you bring that level of abstraction down to a very tangible level? So like you use the example, or you referenced our example of getting in the co-pilot seat. Well, co-pilot is referencing a car, and a car is something that we all have daily interaction with. So can you get more into your co-pilot process? That's a core message that is relatively concrete, and that helps it with its stickiness.
The next letter in the model of success is C, stands for credible, meaning that when you want to become an excellent communicator, communicate something that sticks and moves forward, it has to be credible to some degree. You can't just assume people are going to believe it because you said it. People like to have credibility behind the things they believe and, understand and embody. So credibility can help. If you can point to some research, if you can point to even anti-credibility is helpful. Like, well, this person over here doesn't believe this thing. That can even be credible depending on what that is. But credibility is important. People like to know that other people too have vetted this, and it's not just them and some weirdo that's telling them something they're going to believe. They want to know that they're not going to be alone in this new belief or this new perspective or this way of seeing things. So to become an excellent communicator, that credibility piece is so important.
Now, this one is tough for people, say, teaching something like we're teaching, which is personality types and personality models, which go in and out of fashion. They're frequently not in very high fashion with, say, the field of psychology or psychiatry. And so credibility is tough in the field that we work in. And so what we've done in order to establish credibility is we try to, like, say if somebody purchases one of our programs, we make sure that they can, we have a pretty strict return policy, strict as in like strict on our end, not on the other person's end. We have a completely open 30-day return policy. So that's something that we have to do in order to give ourselves credibility, because we don't have necessarily like a whole, like list of scientific research that has gone into verifying that Myers-Briggs is empirically true. We don't have that benefit. So people have to be able to know that they can try it. And if it's not for them, then there's nothing lost. And that's another thing that for us in our particular field that we have to rely on, making sure that we're giving the highest quality information we can, that we're speaking with integrity, that we make sure that people understand that if they were to, say, give value back in the ways of purchasing something, that they're not going to be out any money if it's not for them. So one of the things that we've done to try to establish credibility is to just sort of be solid, if at all possible. Like, we just want to be solid people. And that's one of the ways that we've tried to establish credibility, because we can't really pull on those scientific resources. But you might be in a different situation. You might be in a context where you actually do have hard scientific facts, that you've got statistics, that you've got a lot of data behind you, and make sure that you pull that in. If you're trying to make your concept sticky, make sure that you're not ignoring that piece where you can actually, point to scientific research, peer-reviewed papers, whatever it is that you're dealing with, make sure that you have those numbers and stats, because those are important.
The next letter is E, which stands for emotional. And, in the book, we just talked about numbers and stats, but in the book, Chip and Dan talk about how it also has to be an emotional appeal. It has to have some empathy to it. It has to have emotion with it. People don't just care about raw numbers and data. They want to know that you care about them. They want to know that there's some emotional reason for this communication also. And that emotional piece can be very powerful. And maybe you are a person that lends yourself more toward, emotion or performance, and there's ways to really communicate through emotion, through how much you believe something. It can't be the only thing you rely on, but the emotion you bring to the communication can also have an impact on the people receiving that message. I mean, you've seen people that stand up, politicians or whoever, stand up and give an unemotional appeal for something, and you're like, they don't believe this. They're just saying this because it's a soundbite or whatever. And then you see somebody else stand up and maybe they bumble with what they're saying, but they really embody it. They really believe it, and you can feel their heart. And you say, I believe that person because they are, they're emotional around it. There's feeling here, and I can sense that. So emotion's very important.
There's a saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And the emotional component, I just said, don't forget those metrics. Don't forget the numbers, because people want to see numbers and metrics. And like you just said, but they don't care about that until they know how much you care as an individual. So your credibility will actually be the tail of the comment of emotional, being personal, making sure that people understand what's in it for them. A lot of people won't care about anything until they understand how it benefits them as an individual. And for the intuitive awakening movement, that's something that we really have to think about, because we're coming online going, hey, there's a percentage of us that are disenfranchised, and you should care about that, those of you who don't feel disenfranchised. I mean, obviously, people are not going to necessarily resonate with that if it doesn't impact them directly. So finding ways to articulate that this is something that's personal to you too, even if you're not necessarily somebody who could be counted amongst this, like a person who will be personally impacted in the movement by saying, ooh, I'm intuitive. There's still benefits. There's still a holistic, ecological ecosystem of benefits, and we have to make sure that that message is very clear. For you, whatever your message is, make sure that you have that just as clear in your mind, how it's benefiting the other person, not just benefiting you. Again, people cannot borrow your convictions from you. It has to be something that touches their heart as well. In order for it to be a conviction for them, a sustainable conviction, it has to be something that reaches their soul. So how do you articulate it in a way that has it really, like, they can really identify with it? One of the examples they used in the book was the phrase, don't mess with Texas, which Don't Mess with Texas was an anti-littering campaign that Texas started because the litter had gotten out of control. And so they were trying to make it so that the people who lived in Texas, it was part of their identity that you don't mess with Texas. And that includes Texans messing with Texas. But that's not how it got absorbed. It got absorbed with, now people use it all the time. Don't mess with Texas. And it's because their identity was wrapped up in that. Yeah, you're right. We don't mess with Texas. And that includes littering. So it was a very sticky message that ended up, getting co-opted for other things as well. But the original intent, which was the anti-littering campaign, was a very successful campaign because it made sure to hit the person straight at their identity.
The final letter in this model, so the word again is success, and each letter stands for a word. The final word on success at the end of the word is stories. Narratives are powerful. Stories are powerful. If you get told like a list of data points, 10 data points or one story, it's more likely you're going to remember a story than you are 10 disparate pieces of information just randomly assembled. Stories have a way of sticking with us. And if you want to make your message stick, creating a narrative, creating a personal story, creating some way that this is a narrative fashion, people love this, which is why we watch so much content on Netflix and television and movies and radio. Like, we love to hear stories. And that's how we translate information. That's how we understand our world. Stories are powerful and narratives are powerful. If you can make your message into a narrative, into a story, it will be sticky and your communication will become excellent.
Yeah, what stories do, the two things that they really do is the first, they afford an opportunity of to simulate what you're talking about for the other person. We a lot of times talk about mirroring each other. Like, when you really want to get somebody in rapport with you, you'll start to mirror their behavior and you'll mirror their gestures and you'll mirror their tonality. When you're trying to get somebody to understand your message, a story is a way for them to mirror the experience you're trying to get them to have. It's a way for them to simulate being in a situation where they can really understand on a personal level how it's meaningful to them. And then the second thing a story does is it inspires, because you can really be quite emotionally manipulative in a story. I think of movies like the movie Rudy. Rudy is just like one big, huge emotional manipulation for me. Every time I watch it, I'm just like, oh, he got to play for Notre Dame for like 2 seconds. And it's really not that big of a deal that happened, right? Like, it didn't help people across the world solve famine issues. It didn't like stop war. And yet when you watch the movie Rudy, you're just like, your heart is just bursting for this guy. You're able to simulate what it was like to be in his situation. You're able to be inspired to go, well, if he could make his dreams come true, I know I could. And that's the power of a story. And so if you really want, like you said, if you really want it to be sticky, make it personal. And one of the best ways to make something personal is to make it about me. And I get to be in that simulated situation by living through it in that story.
So we've talked about a model from the book, Made to Stick. It's an acronym, the word success, and it stands for simple, making your message simple, unexpected, concrete, credible, emotional, and stories. Now, the one thing we've talked about here is the message, the outgoing message. And this is from a broadcast standpoint. I'm the one that's delivering the message outward, and I'm looking to become a really excellent communicator. And you listening, if you want to become an excellent communicator, these are great ideas. This is a great starting point. One of the things I think this model fails to mention, I think this is the heart and soul of what we really care about here, is they don't talk about contextualizing your message for the listener themselves. And one of the things, you're not just writing your message, not just speaking your message, but you're also trying to make sure you're making it palatable for the person that will be receiving it. Obviously, here at Personality Hacker, we believe everyone is fundamentally wired differently. We believe people receive messages differently. And so I think taking this model and adding it with some sophistication on knowing how to talk to other people and the language that they use, the way their mind learns information and makes decisions, you mix that with this model, and that becomes a powerhouse of communication for you.
And one of the ways to do that is to continue to explore people's personality types in blog posts and in podcasts. And, you can get formal training. We offer formal training around understanding typology and understanding systems. So there's lots of different ways to gain that knowledge and information, and then modify your message to make sure that whoever is your demographic or the types of people that are your demographic, that you're speaking their language.
Let's do a little workshopping real quick before we wrap up. Where do you think that you and I and our company, Personality Hacker, can get better using the success model? I think we're really good at understanding how people are wired, but from this broadcast standpoint, the success model itself, those 6 different words, let's talk a little bit about some of the ways that we think we can improve, and maybe that'll help give some insight to you as a listener too, as we dialogue about this in our own business, in our own communication.
Yeah. So I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping things simple. I think that's one of the reasons why we even started this to begin with, is that we saw that there's a lot of information online about things like cognitive function stacks in the Myers-Briggs system. but there's also a barrier of entry for it. So it can be kind of complicated for people. And what we wanted to do is make it as simple as possible for entry-level students, because the point is not to just become really good at understanding, say, typology or typology systems. The purpose is to become a better person or a better version of yourself. So we try to keep that as simple as possible. So I think we've done a pretty good job of keeping things simple. Sometimes to the the grumbling of others, people who are nerds or geeks in the field, the Myers-Briggs geeks, sometimes want us to be more complicated than we actually are. But we actually are not writing our articles for people who are Myers-Briggs geeks. We're actually writing our articles for people who might know something about Myers-Briggs but don't know what cognitive functions are. So our audience is actually different than sometimes the audience that we end up attracting, which I find is very interesting. I think we have done a decent job of being unexpected in the sense that we take typology models and specifically apply them to personal development. And I don't think that that's common. I think most people who study typology do so because they love the system inherently, like in and of itself, or not inherently, but intrinsically. And yet we love the models, and yet at the same time, we want to use them for something very specific, which is development and growth. So I think that's a little unexpected.
I would say that we could probably do a better job at becoming more unexpected up front. I think you get through the first, 30 seconds to a few minutes of an article, and then you realize how unexpected it actually is. But I also want to make sure we're not sensational with our headlines or the way we write things. We promise things we don't deliver on. So there's a balance there. So that's something that I think we could work on. If we want to become more, unexpected up front, we got to make sure we do it in a way that's not sensationalized.
Yeah, it's not like clickbaity, like this person, like she never knew that her boyfriend would say this, right? And you're like, ooh, what did she say? But now that we've had a lot of examples of clickbait over the last couple of years, we're kind of like, oh, I know it's not going to be as awesome as the headline makes me think it's going to be.
Yeah.
So it's a combination between staying in integrity and actually having legitimately good content, and also being unexpected without being clickbaity. So yeah, I think that there's work there. We could definitely improve there. Being concrete is always something that I struggle with. I think the car model is good. I think that's a nice piece. But when it comes to, say, intuitive awakening, like the movement, dude, we're so abstract. We are so abstract on that. And I think bringing that down to a more concrete level, we use examples like left-handed people versus right-handed people to illustrate the difference between sensors and intuitives. And yet, why would left-handed versus right-handed require a movement? So I think that where we could really work on our personal messaging is in being more concrete.
I would say the concrete thing is by far the one that we can improve on the best in the way we communicate. I think that making things more tangible, and one of the things that I always think about is we talk to people about growing that co-pilot. What are some concrete exercises they can do? What are some actual things that we can do? We have a lot of those in the starter kits, online, and the messages and all the articles we put out. But more and more of those concrete actual exercises, I think, are really powerful. And as we continue to go, we keep adding to those. And I think that's something we can do a good job at adding more concrete stuff to.
Yeah, I think I've sort of made peace with the fact that most of the content we teach has a low level of scientific credibility. And yet I think what we've done is we've tried to make it credible by providing value up front, and then also with testimonials. I'm not sure what we could do. I mean, obviously, we also follow Dario Nardi's work, which is helping cognitive functions get in a more, it's still pretty soft and squishy science, but it will become harder science over time, fingers crossed. So I think that helps. And at the same time, I think I've just sort of made peace with the fact that this is not hard science, so we're just going to have to live with that.
I have a question for you when we get to emotional. I'm a feeler, right? So I love the emotional component of things, but one of the things I'm always getting feedback from thinkers is you're making this too touchy-feely, too emotional. And I argue, just because you're a thinker doesn't mean you don't want something emotional. But I would be interested to hear your perspective as a thinker. Do you think that, what's your balance as far as being a thinker, and what do you think most thinkers show up with their expectations of emotions, and how I feel like we do a pretty good balance of making things not super gooey, but also make them emotionally compelling and approachable. I think we do a good job at that.
Do you actually get that feedback a lot from thinkers?
I do. Not so much on our website, but like places like YouTube, ancillary outpost sites, like social media, I'll get some feedback on thinkers don't, this is too touchy-feely. Thinkers don't feel this way or think this way. This is too gooey for us. I'll get it there. Not so much on our listeners, not so much people like you listening. I haven't got a lot of feedback from you necessarily, but Outposts, other places I've gotten some of that feedback.
Yeah, that's sort of a tough one, especially anytime you're talking about typology systems, you run into a couple different, I call them pain points for me because they're so frustrating to me, but they're not really pain points. They're just phenomena that show up. The first thing is that people just in a baffling way to me, massively over-identify with their personality type in a way where it is so past the law of diminishing returns. And we got that on our website recently, the INTJ article. Somebody wrote a comment about how INTJs are not soft and squishy or have a squishy center, that I'm completely wrong, that I must be playing to an emotional feeler audience, etc. And I'm like, didn't you
see? There we go. There's the exact comment I'm talking about.
Right. Well, but that was me. I wrote that, and I'm a thinker. And yet, I was like, did you see the 40 to 50 other comments from INTJ saying you hit the nail on the head? Like, do you understand that you're not the only INTJ out there, and that people are going to experience their type in different ways? And the only thing that makes you similar is the foundational hardwiring upon which you can write literally any software program. So your experience will vary, and yet this is the construction of how INTJs are made. So there was like an over-attachment or an over-identification with what an INTJ should look like, and that was them. And then the second phenomena is that there's a projection that all INTJs are like that. I recently heard, I don't even remember who or what was said, but you recently said that there was an INTJ, you were using the phrase hold space. And an INTJ said, an INTJ would never use the phrase holding space. And what was so funny is when you told me that, I was like, but I picked that up from an INTJ. It was my old business partner was an INTJ, and he used to use that phrase all the time, and that's where I picked it up. So it was like this idea of like, oh, people of certain types would never do that. And it's like, no, they do that. Like, you don't do that, but other people do that. And that's not how it works. So I guess whenever we get feedback of like, this idea of like, we shouldn't be emotional or we shouldn't be telling these stories because, this type, my type would never want that. The first thing that comes up for me, and maybe this is because I use introverted thinking or accuracy, the first thing that comes up is, okay, I know the percentage of population that is of your type. It doesn't matter what you are. And then I immediately, like in my mind, do some math of like timesing that percentage of the population by 7 billion. And it's always in the hundreds of millions of people. And I'm like, really? Every person of your type in the hundreds of millions are going to experience being your type the exact same way. So I guess a part of me is a little dismissive of this idea that, thinkers don't want a story. They don't want things emotional. It's like, well, no, you don't want that. But there's plenty of other thinkers who are totally fine with that. Just like a feeler might go, oh, a feeler would never do that. And it's like, no, you would never do that. But there's plenty of other feelers out there that think differently than you or experience things different. So I guess it's got to be sort of the chorus. What is the chorus saying, not the individual and does it appear as if their individual statements are a reflection of an entire type, or is it a reflection of them as an individual?
As you're talking, I think a nuance here is coming up for me that I think, so if you're a person that values criteria, metrics, data, I think what people might be saying here, like thinkers, for example, might be saying is when you're emotional, please don't use emotion to cover over bad data. And please don't use emotion to manipulate me when data would just work way better because I think in terms of data or metrics. So don't use it in a manipulative way or to cover over something, like cover your butt on something. Like be forthcoming with the information first. You can contextualize it in a way that's approachable and is emotional, but please don't use that as a crutch or to cover over something.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the nuance I'd come up with.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think that there's something to be said for that. Okay. I think that we do a pretty good job of trying to balance the two on our website and blog posts. And I think that's because both of us are, I as an ENTP and as an ENFP, we have thinking and feeling as our co-pilot and 10-year-old positions. And if that's an unfamiliar statement to you, please go back to the podcast that we did on ENTPs and ENFPs, and I'll elucidate what I'm trying to say here. But we have a very sort of balanced relationship with our thinking and feeling process. So I think we try to do a good job of lending that credibility piece, if it's at all possible to do so, and then also the emotional piece. I know I could get better at storytelling. I know that I have a tendency to data dump. I have a tendency to go right for the data. And because of that, I know that I need to improve on storytelling. And then you come in and save me. Like in our podcast, we'll be talking and then you'll just swoop in there and you'll be like, yeah, it's like this story. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad he told the story because that was perfect. So I think we do a pretty good job with that. I don't think there's as much of a discrepancy there as there is like with concreteness. We're both leading with an intuitive process, so we both are super abstract. And I think that concrete piece is definitely more of our blind spot than the emotional and credibility piece.
I'd like to hear from you listening, because you haven't been able to talk to us, but I would have loved to have a microphone with you to know what you think about what we're talking about. Just using kind of us as a prototype or your own life. We don't care. Whatever. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Leave a comment underneath this podcast about your perspective, your feedback, what your thoughts are around this success model we just did.
Well, and also your mission. One of the reasons why it's so important for us to do podcasts on these kinds of topics is that we really want to empower you to have, if you've got something to say, we want you to be able to say it. We want you to be able to find that mission and then have as many tools as possible to, really be persuasive with that mission. Because the onus is on us to be good, effective communicators, to be persuasive. And our major mission, one of our major missions, is finding people out there who have a message and just really feel like it's bottled up inside of them and they have something they want to say, and we want to empower those people to say it. So it's really important to us, if you have a mission, a message, something that you want to remind the world or something that it never knew and you want to teach it, we'd love to know what that is. And what have been your experiences with trying to make that message as persuasive as possible?
You can do that over at personalityhacker.com again, or join our community of growing like minds, just like yourself, over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack.
If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you are feeling a spirit of reciprocity and you like what you hear on our podcast, please feel free to go over to iTunes and give us a rating and review. That really helps us out in iTunes algorithms for when they cross-promote different podcasts. So if that's something that you feel motivated to do, that would be a kindness to us.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for being a part of us this show this week. We really enjoyed having you here, even though you can't talk, but hopefully we can hear from you over at personalityhacker.com. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.